I'm so glad to see everybody here this morning. What a great group we have. I want to thank, first of all, FATV they're actually going to record this event today so that everybody can check it out. Over the years, we've had so many people that have contacted me that can't do the walk for a lot of reasons, for either health reasons or they're Fitchburg people living in California and they're so interested in it. But now FATV will preserve the walk forever on tape and you'll be able to go there and see it any time that you want. So that's fantastic. I also want to thank some of my former students. I can hardly believe. Raise your hand, my former students. 1, 2, 3, 4. I taught school in Shirley for 35 years, and these are some of the kids that still owe me work from back then. Thanks so much for attending. I really appreciate it. And we have people from all over the place here today. I talked to people from Gardner, can you imagine that? Leominster. And we even have someone from Vermont that came down to the big city. So it's great to see everybody. We've been doing this now for about 7 years. We do it kind of in the spring and in the fall. And then I do it for special groups like reunion groups. Boy Scout groups have done it before and things like that. So, but mainly it's the spring and the fall. So participate, ask questions, and let's learn a lot about Fitchburg's history. We ready to go? Yeah. Okay, here we go. We're standing in front right now of the Joseph A. Battles house, built about 1832. Joseph A. Battles came to Fitchburg from Westminster to take a job at the Fitchburg Baking Company, which was right on Circle Street, just a couple hundred feet from here. There he would meet his future wife, the wife of the owner, Ellen Smith, very young and very beautiful. So he worked at the Fitchburg Bakery for several years, and eventually Joseph A. Battles got a job as the superintendent of streets in Fitchburg. And he worked that job for many, many years. Battles was also the president of the Northern Worcester County Agricultural Society. And he ran huge cattle and produce shows every year down at the Summer Street Fairgrounds on Lower Summer Street. And he was responsible for that. Joseph A. Battles was a very well-known figure in town, and he was a very, very liked and respected member of the community. Well, Joseph A. Battles did not make his fortune working for the city or working for the bakery. Joseph A. Battles went on to own 2 stables in Fitchburg. He owned the Rollstone stables, which was right in back of Workers' Credit Union, right in back of a major hotel that was there, the Rollstone Hotel, Rollstone Stables. And he also owned another stable in back of the American House, which was in Lower Main Street by the depot. He made a fortune in the livery business. He was the first person in Fitchburg to rent hacks and barges, which today translates to cars and trucks. So he made a lot of money doing that. Ages ago, when my wife and I first bought this house, we wanted to put a plaque on it, figure out when it was built, and a little bit about the owner. We went to the Fitchburg Historical Society to do a little research on Joseph A. Battles, and lo and behold, they had an entire folder on Joseph A. Battles. So I started to thumb through it, and I picked out a tattered and torn Sentinel article, and the title of that article was Fortune to Solve Mystery of Wraith of Wife. I didn't even know what wraith was. So I looked it up, and wraith was a ghostly character that appears after one passes away. Well, Joseph A. Battles' wife passed away very early on in this house. And Joseph A. Battles started to get heavily involved in spiritualism, the occult, telepathy, clairvoyancy, and he believed that he could communicate with his wife in this house. He believed that so strongly that upon his passing, he left $5,000 to Clark University in Worcester to study the ghostly happenings of this house. If you go back in some of the early Sentinel articles in Fitchburg, it's very well documented that this house was considered haunted by people that lived in the city. Walking by it at night, they would shun it and walk across the street. And even Joseph A. Battle's maid that lived with him in this house would not stay here any longer at night. She would stay somewhere else and just visit him during the day. So this house has a good slug of history to it right here in the Common. If you were living in one of these brick row houses back in those days in Fitchburg, you were living good. You had a great spot in the city. Are there ghosts in here? As far as I know, there are no ghosts in here, but there are still very strange things happening in the house.
Like what?
Well, I guess you have to figure it out. Okay, on this site, close to the road, was once a huge white colonial home. It had a large brick barn, to its rear, and gardens that went all the way down to the Nashua River. This was the home of Sylvester and Martha Litchfield. Sylvester Litchfield and his son Orrin Litchfield, who lived right up on Prospect Street, owned a quarry up on Rollstone Hill. And they had their land and stone office right here on the side of the building. They worked out of this particular site. Now the Litchfield family, again, were into granite and stone from Rollstone Hill. They are the ones that supplied and installed the granite for the addition that was built to City Hall in the rear of City Hall in 1879. They laid the granite and the brickwork, four-story brickwork, for the addition to City Hall. They were very prominent quarry people, of the day. However, they have an incredible connection to the Rollstone boulder. You're going to learn from this walk today that Fitchburg's famous icon, the Rollstone boulder, had 3 separate and distinct attempts to preserve it over the years. And the Litchfield family was responsible for the first attempt. It was about 1880, and people that were visiting the boulder on top of Rollstone Hill started to notice that the boulder was developing these huge cracks and fissures. And they were afraid that the boulder was going to fracture and split apart. And they did not want that to happen to their favorite spot in town. So this went on for years and years. People talking about the fact that the boulder's going to break apart, we're not going to have it anymore. So Sylvester Litchfield got in touch with a friend of his, H.M. Francis, and they decided they were going to do something about it. Sylvester Litchfield went up to Rollstone Hill. The boulder was on his property at that time. He cemented all the cracks of the boulder with cement. You can still find very early pictures, photographs, that still have remnants of the cement. H.M. Francis family was originally from Lunenburg, and he had a brother that worked at the Archibald blacksmith shop in Lunenburg on Route 2A. That was located where there's a vacant gas station today, just before the center, the Archibald blacksmith shop. He had his brother fabricate a 3-inch wide iron band that would circle the boulder to hold it together in case a piece split off. These 2 gentlemen went up to the hill, cement an iron band, and that was the first attempt to preserve the boulder in 1889. Number 1. It is incredible. The house that was here was moved in 1924 down by that mini rotary. And then after a while it was raised. And the reason it was moved is because the house was moved because it was sold to a gas station company from New York, the Saucony Gas Station Company, and they built one of Fitchburg's first service stations right here on this site. That building, by the way, is basically the service station, just remodeled. Let's move across the street to the star of the show. So, the Rollstone boulder really is the icon that started off this whole rock walk. Weighing in at 110 tons, 45 feet in circumference, 10 to 12 feet tall. It's the oldest historic relic in Fitchburg. It came here 25,000 years ago, and it was deposited exactly on the summit of Rollstone Hill. And it stood out on Rollstone Hill like a golf ball on a tee. It could be seen everywhere from the city. So people really absolutely loved this icon. You know, Fitchburg likes this icon so much that it names things after it. Boulder Drive. FATV gives out every year a Boulder Award. We've got the Boulder Cafe. We've got the Boulder Art Gallery. In First Parish Church, the Boulder Coffee House. Fitchburg High School has named their yearbook the Boulder since 1929, when the Boulder was moved here. The brick row houses over there, there was a barber shop that used to be there, the Boulder Barber Shop. And early on, that was the Boulder service station. We don't even want to get into talking about Rollstone. There's so many things named Rollstone in town, but those are just a few. The boulder was reconstructed in the Upper Common in 1929 and 1930 by a mason by the name of J. Mark LeBlanc. He was paid by the city of Fitchburg to put the pieces back together. And that was done over just a couple of years. There was a Fitchburg resident, her name was Teresa Garfield, that sat on the steps of the church and recorded that there were 54 major pieces that went into putting this boulder back together. The boulder was still on the top of Rollstone Hill, and there was a quarry company working up there, the Jeremiah Shea Quarry Company. They were taking granite off the hill, the boulder was there, and the quarry head wall was getting closer and closer to the boulder. They knew that it had to go. So they announced to the mayor, they announced to the city, we're going to blast that boulder. People in general went crazy. They did not want to see the boulder destroyed. At this time, in this one time, the Fitchburg Historical Society stepped up to the plate and paid a moving company that moved homes, the John P. Moran Moving Company. They paid him $100 to take the Rollstone boulder while it was up on the hill, jack it up with jacks, build a big wooden sled under the boulder, bring a team of oxen up to Rollstone Hill, and drag the boulder 50 feet away from the quarry head wall. That was done in 1902. And there's still incredible pictures available of that move. When John Moran moved the boulder 50 feet, the Historical Society went up to check it out and said, you know, maybe we should move it another 50 because this quarry company is still taking granite. So they went to John P. Moran and said, geez, can you do it another 50 feet? And he said, sure, for $100. And the Historical Society simply did not have the money to pay another $100 to move it, so he dropped it right where it was, up on Rollstone Hill. The boulder stayed from 1902 to 1929, 1930, pretty protected. But in 1929, September 6, 1929, another quarry company, the McAuliffe Quarry Corporation, same scenario. The quarry head wall was getting closer and closer to the boulder. It was right on the edge. It had to go. They announced to the city, they announced to the mayor, we're going to blast the boulder apart on this given morning. Letters went to the mayor's office like you wouldn't believe. Editorials in the Sentinel, constant every day. People wanted the boulder preserved. They wanted to save the boulder. The mayor at that time was Joseph Carrier. And Joseph Carrier, thank goodness, decided he was going to talk to the people that owned the quarry and see if they could come together with some plan. And they decided the best case scenario was to blast it apart and reassemble it somewhere. So they formed a committee to do just that. But before they did that, they sent the city engineers up to Rollstone Hill, and they spent a couple of days painting different colored lines all over the boulder, different colored symbols by each crack and fissure. In other words, marking the entire boulder with red and white paint. So when it was exploded, there'd be some way to put it back together. So in 1929, 1930, they blew the boulder apart on Rollstone Hill, 54 major pieces. It stayed on Rollstone Hill for a year in a pile. And then the next year, it was moved down to the Common, where it was put together by J. Mark LeBlanc. He had a heck of a time putting it back together because the city had installed a base to set it on, but there were trolley tracks here, both sides of the road. And every time that they tried to work with cement, the cement would filter out of the cracks and the pieces would fall off. So they came up with another plan of attaching the pieces together side to side with metal rods. This boulder has a shell, but the inside is filled with rubble. And there were many pieces that would not fit back into the inside. Two major pieces were put on the corner of Prospect Street and Main Street, and they were just left there by the city. They were there for weeks and weeks. Finally, a piano teacher, the second house up on Prospect Street, her name is Madeline Gaylor, convinced the city workers to move that big segment of the boulder to her yard. It's still there today. You can see it if you go up Prospect Street. The second piece mysteriously disappeared, but surfaced many years later. It was grabbed by a guy by the name of Henry Fredericks, who owned the Moran Square Diner, and then the Pullman Diner, which was right by the entrance to Boulder Drive. He took it. And he donated it to the Cathedral of the Pines in Rindge, New Hampshire. And today you can go to the Cathedral of the Pines gift shop, and they have a plan of the altar, and it points right to the Rollstone boulder fragment. It's there. So again, the boulder has a lot of history. This plaque was installed by the Fitchburg Historical Society about 7 years after the boulder was put in the Common. It was paid for and installed by the Fitchburg Historical Society in 1937, about 7 years later. Unfortunately, there's two mistakes on the plaque. The first mistake is that they claim the boulder was paid for by popular subscription. That's people in Fitchburg donating money to help pay for this. Never happened. Just didn't. Keep in mind though, these are Depression years, 1929, 1930. So they raised very, very little money. And the second major problem was they claimed the boulder came from the Monadnock region of New Hampshire. It was later discovered that the granite that the boulder's made out of it's called porphyritic granite, and it's found nowhere in the Monadnock region. But it is found much further north in the Bradford-Warren area of New Hampshire. So this boulder had a long journey to get from northern New Hampshire to the top of Rollstone Hill. It had a traveling companion back in its day, someone much smaller, the Plymouth Rock. It made it a little further south. Okay, let's move across the street to the grass. Okay, we're on the Upper Common right now, but this was not always called the Upper Common. This was once called Captain William Brown's Woodlot. There was nothing here but one cart path that ran along the river and just complete woods. There was nothing else here. Back then, Captain William Brown came to Fitchburg after the Revolutionary War. Nobody really knows why, because he didn't have any family connections in Fitchburg. Nobody here he knew. But he soon became a big part of the community and a welcome part of the community. He opened a tavern on the corner of Academy and Main that became very popular. He also opened a cotton mill down by the river in the Riverside Park area that became very profitable. From those two businesses, he was able to buy a lot of land in Fitchburg, and this was part of it. During that time, right after the Revolutionary War, Fitchburg citizens were embroiled in a big battle on where to locate their second church and meeting house. There were two groups of people in town. One group wanted the center of Fitchburg and the meeting house and church to be on Dean Hill, where the Dean Hill Tavern is. And they had a lot of good reasons. That area of the city had a lot of fertile farmland. It already had a tavern. It had a blacksmith shop, a few homes, a general store. So they had a lot going for them. But the other group of people wanted the church and the meeting house to be built more towards the center of town, in the valley, along the river. It took 10 years and 99 town meetings to figure out where they were going to put the town hall. And it was written up in papers. It was like the best entertainment in town were these town meetings. And they were like Jerry Springer shows of the day. Finally, Captain William Brown said, listen, I'll donate some land for you to build the second meeting house and church. So he donated this big piece of land where they finally built this church. Now we call this the First Parish Church, but it's actually the third First Parish Church. The very first one was built on the corner of Blossom Street and Crescent Street. And that was land that was given to the city by Thomas Cowden, Captain Thomas Cowden. He owned a lot of land in that area of the city. The second First Parish Meeting House and Church was built on this site, and that's the one after all those meetings. The people that lost the vote, the only reason they would compromise if they were able to have a say in designing the church and its orientation. So when that second meeting house was built here, it was actually built in front of this building and on an angle. The front door faced that way. And that was here until 1837. In 1837, the third First Parish Church was built on this site. Take a look at those granite columns. Those are 20-ton granite columns, one piece, that came from Rollstone Hill. Every piece of granite in that building came from Rollstone Hill. Every brick in that building came from the Alonzo Goodrich Brickyard on 99 Summer Street, right behind Levi Chartrand's funeral home. The pastor at that time was Reverend Payson. And Reverend Payson was like the first mayor of Fitchburg. There was not a mayor yet. So what he said went. If you lived in Massachusetts at that time when they were building these early churches, in order to become a town in Massachusetts, you had to have a meeting house or a church that was paid for by public taxes and funded by public taxes. This was way before the separation of church and state. This building was designed by a famous architect, Zachariah Sheldon, with a beautiful addition put on the back. And a lot of people don't know this. There's a theater in the back of this church. It's a very small, intimate theater that was designed by H.M. Francis. So it's a beautiful example of early architecture. Before we leave this site, behind it, there's a white church, a Swedish church. And to the right of the Boulder Art Gallery, you can just see the top of it. There's a gray peak. That was the first Baptist church, built in 1833. They had a rear door where they would baptize parishioners right in the Nashua River. And that used to have a steeple on it, but they tore down the steeple when the church dissolved. And by the way, when that church dissolved, they built a beautiful First Baptist church to the right of the old Wallace Library. That was a gorgeous church that, again, they tore down. So there's a big history in this area of churches. Questions? Okay, let's move this way. Right over here. Let's talk a little bit, if we can, about this gorgeous fountain that's in the Upper Common. There was a gentleman, a family, that moved to Fitchburg at the turn of the century called the Adams family. And Samuel Herbert Adams came to Fitchburg with his family from Concord, Vermont, when he was only 4 years old. Samuel Herbert Adams grew up in Fitchburg, and he attended the Fitchburg Public Schools. When he got into the high school, he started taking some art classes, and one of his teachers at Fitchburg High School, her name was Mrs. Haskell, noticed that he had a very, very keen ability to carve things out of wood and make 3D sculptures. So she encouraged him to pursue a career in the arts. Even though his father, who came to Fitchburg to take a job at the Putnam Machine Company as a pattern maker, his father did not want to hear it. You could not make a living as an artist. Come to work with me at the Putnam Machine Company, make some money, and you can afford a family. Well, Samuel Herbert Adams decided he was still going to follow his dreams. He graduated from Fitchburg High School, and he enrolled at that time at the Massachusetts Normal School in Boston to learn art, which later became the Massachusetts College of Art. He graduated from the Massachusetts Normal School and took a job at Fitchburg High School for 4 years teaching art. He then realized he wanted to pursue his dream and open a studio where he could create sculptures. The place to do that was Paris. So he decided he was going to pack his bags, get on a steamer, move to Paris, and open a studio in Paris. Shortly after he opened, he was contacted by 3 Fitchburg industrialists, and their names are right on this plaque. The first was Rodney Wallace. Rodney Wallace lived right up on Prospect Street, halfway up on the right, big house with a mural on the side. He owned Fitchburg Paper Company. The second person was Henry Willis. Henry Willis was the president of the Rollstone Bank. And Henry Willis lived in a big house to the right of the Fitchburg High School steps on Pritchard Street. The third person was James Phillips. And James Phillips lived in a massive Victorian mansion that was right there, right in the parking lot of the post office. And some of you that know a little bit about the history of Fitchburg know that at one time on that side of the street there were 3 massive mansions. James Phillips owned the worsted wool company in West Fitchburg. So these three Fitchburg industrialists contacted Samuel Herbert Adams in Paris and said, Sam, could you make us a fountain for the Upper Common in Fitchburg? We'll pay for it. Sure. So Samuel Herbert Adams designed this fountain in Paris. It was shipped to the United States and installed here in 1898. The granite basin came from Rollstone Hill. It was shaped by the O'Connor Stone Yard over on River Street. The incredible thing about this sculpture is many towns were putting sculptures in their parks at the time, but many of them were political in nature, or maybe figures after a world war, like the Civil War or something like that. This was meant to be public art, and public art only. Fitchburg is very, very lucky because they have Samuel Herbert Adams' first major piece. This is it. And it was also the first major piece of bronze artwork to be shipped to the United States, done with a brand new process called the wax lost process. So those people that are into art and art history will really know that that's kind of a special thing. The name of the fountain is the Boys and Turtles Fountain, and it depicts two young boys, probably brothers, with one kind of protected behind his older brother because of the territorial turtles that spray water at them. And I feel it's my responsibility to dispel a long-held urban legend. And you know what that's going to be, Hal, right? There are people that I've taken on this walk that will swear and put money on it that when this thing was installed, what?
I swear and put money on it, when this thing was installed, that fig leaf was not there.
The little boy was peeing into the fountain.
Yes!
Not true. Not true. It was never like that. However, when Samuel Herbert Adams designed this fountain in Paris, it was anatomically correct, and it was meant to do that. And there are pictures of this fountain looking like that. These three guys got a hold of the pictures of that fountain and got in touch with Samuel Herbert Adams and said, no. Fitchburg is not ready for this yet. So can you do something to maybe hide that a little bit? This leaf, or whatever it is, was done in Paris, and it's original to the sculpture. And I know there are people like yourself, and I run into them all the time, but that's the way it is.
Must have been a photo.
Maybe we can just turn around and stay where we are and look across the street. Okay, what I want to talk about right now is right across the street, and it's the last brick row house. I'm only talking about the one that has the black railing in front of it. Just that piece. That is the home of Amasa Norcross. Now, Amasa Norcross was a big part of Fitchburg's community. Very well-known guy. I want you to think about this for a minute and some of the things he did in his lifetime. He was on 3 separate bank boards in the city of Fitchburg. He was a lawyer in the city of Fitchburg. He was a member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives. At another time, he was a member of the Massachusetts Senate. He went to Washington and became a United States congressman. Then he was a member of the United States House of Representatives. Busy guy. And if that wasn't enough, he was appointed by one of his friends in Washington, D.C., Abraham Lincoln, to be the assessor, the tax assessor for the 9th Congressional District, which included Fitchburg. So this guy did a lot. Amasa Norcross married Susan Wallace, and they had 2 children, Nelson and Eleanor. Eleanor Norcross and Nelson Norcross. Nelson Norcross died at age 3 from scarlet fever. Eleanor Norcross's mom died when she was just 14 from consumption, right here in this house. So Fitchburg's, I'm getting to this, Fitchburg's famous artist, Eleanor Norcross, throughout her entire life, was basically brought up by her father. That's who was her figure. Now, Eleanor Norcross grew up in a fairly well-to-do family. Amasa Norcross did have some money. So at that time, when women really did not attend college, he was able to afford to send his daughter to some of the best colleges. She went to Wheaton College, which later became Wellesley College, and she studied art. She also went to the Fitchburg Normal School, which became the Boston Museum of, no, Massachusetts Art. So she went there also. She graduated from there and came to Fitchburg, and again, like Samuel Herbert Adams, taught art for 4 years at Fitchburg High School. She was extremely interested in painting, and she was quite talented. Her father paid to send her to the best teachers of the day after she graduated. She went to New York to study under the best. She went to Rome to study under the best. She went to Paris to study art. And she became very, very good and very talented. At one point, she asked her father, "Dad, I want to pursue a career in the arts. I want to go to Paris and open up a studio," just like Samuel Herbert Adams. Her father, being a little bit well off, said, "Okay, we can do this under 2 conditions. Number 1, you must come back to Fitchburg every year for 2 months to be part of the community. I don't want you to lose the connection to your hometown. And secondly, you cannot sell any of your artwork to make money. You can give it away, you can donate it, but you're not to sell it." And the reasoning behind Amasa Norcross's rule was that women of the day just did not do that. It was not becoming of them to get involved with selling artwork. So his thing was give it away or donate it. So Amasa Norcross funded a flat, an apartment for Eleanor Norcross in Paris for 40 years. She lived in Paris, visiting Fitchburg in the summers for 40 years. Eleanor Norcross, while she was there, painting and doing her artwork, rubbed elbows with the most famous Impressionist painters of the day. We're talking people like Monet, Degas, Cézanne, Rodin, Mary Cassatt. She was friends with them. She probably had them over to her apartment. She was the first American woman to have a private art show at the Louvre in Paris. And when that was over, the artwork was shipped to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, where she had another private show. When Eleanor Norcross passed away in 1924, she left $1,000 to the city of Fitchburg with the express direction of starting an art museum in Fitchburg. And that was the start of the Fitchburg Art Museum. Okay, let's move on. Okay, because we're on this spot right now, I will mention this. We talked a little bit about Samuel Herbert Adams. You kind of remember that? He, in his lifetime, produced over 200 major pieces of public artwork. They're located in Washington, D.C., they're located all over the world, and they're located in Fitchburg. Again, Fitchburg's very lucky to have his very first piece, even luckier to have his very last piece. And that's right there. That's a World War I memorial. It's called Winged Victory. It was modeled after Samuel Herbert Adams' wife, Adeline, and that was installed here right after World War I. That is Samuel Herbert Adams' last piece of sculpture before he passed away. So we have his first and we have his last. The family is interned at the Laurel Hill Cemetery in Fitchburg, as is the entire Norcross family. Okay, let's look across the street. The DeBonis Davin building is the oldest surviving building on Main Street in Fitchburg. It was built in 1796. That is Fitchburg's second meeting house. That was once at an angle right in front of the brick building. And when they decided to build the brick one, they put this building on a sled, pulled it here with teams of oxen, and put it right on this site. That's Fitchburg's second meeting house. Over the years, it served many purposes. It was a home for the Fitchburg Fusiliers. It was a home of the fire department, the police department. It was a meeting house. It was a church. It was used as a Nickelodeon. So it had many, many uses over the years. Very famous people, Emerson and Thoreau, spoke from the pulpit of this church. So it's got a lot of history in Fitchburg. Right past it, you can't see it from here, is Crocker Field. Many of you know about Crocker Field. It was a gift to the city from Alva Crocker in 1919. Now, when Alva Crocker decided to donate Crocker Field to the city, he didn't just hire any architect to design the stadium. He went to the best architects that the United States had at that time, the Olmsted brothers of Brookline, Massachusetts. They were the ones that designed the Boston Common, New York's Gardens, Central Park, the landscape of Chicago's World Fair. They were huge. And they came to Fitchburg to design Crocker Field for Alva Crocker. Crocker Field over the years has had a lot of famous athletes visit it. In 1924, Babe Ruth. He came to Crocker Field. He couldn't even believe that this was a high school field. He thought it's got to be some kind of a college field. It was so nice. In 1925, Paavo Nurmi, the most dedicated, the most recognized track and field athlete that the Olympics ever saw. He won 9 gold medals and 3 silver medals. He ran at this field. Fitchburg's own Pat Moran, the manager of the Cincinnati Reds, that won world championships. He played baseball at this field. So it's been visited over the years by some very, very famous people. And today it's undergoing some nice renovations. Well, let's cross the street. Now that I have you all looking this way, let's look that way. Okay, you're looking at the Calvinistic Congregational Church. Some people may know it as the Faith United Church. This is the third church on this site. The first one was built in 1804. The second one, 1844. And this one in 1898. If you look very closely, you can see part of the old church, the 1844 church, attached to the newer structure in the front. This building was built and designed by H.M. Francis. Who else? And he was a parishioner at this church. So he designed this church and all the plans, of course, at no charge for the church. It's a beautiful building. For those of you that study or are interested in architecture a little bit, this is a classic example of what you call Richardsonian Romanesque architecture. And it was kind of pioneered by an architect in Boston by the name of Henry Richardson. Some of you may be familiar with Trinity Church in Boston. It looks very much like this. And what is that kind of architecture noted for? Well, kind of look at the building. The first thing you have to have is a building that looks like it has heavy mass of stone. You have to have a lot of rough cut stone. You have to have arched windows. You have to have recessed doorways. Not so much on this side, but if you go to the front, there's 3 beautiful recessed doorways. Heavy use of stained glass. And most importantly, asymmetrical towers, which this has. When this church was built, I maybe haven't emphasized this enough, but at that point in time, when a lot of this building and business was going on in Fitchburg, Fitchburg had money. You came to Fitchburg to make your fortune. Everything was in place here to make it. You didn't have to go anywhere else to have anything made or produced. Fitchburg had everything. And people came here, opened mills, opened factories, and made family fortunes. So when this church was built, and they wanted only authentic Louis Tiffany windows from New York, the parishioners couldn't raise their hands fast enough to pay for one of them. As they did downtown at the Christ Church, the other stone church that has authentic Louis Tiffany windows, stained glass windows. Okay, what I want you to do is look over the railing at that iron bridge. That is the Parker bowstring truss bridge, installed here by the Boston Bridge and Iron Works in 1870. It is one of 2 left in the country. And the guy that did this bridge, designed this bridge, Parker, took out a patent for this bridge. And this is the one he used for his patent. So historically, it's very, very important. It's an important bridge. Now, the reason he patented it is because this bridge could be built in a shop. All you had to do was build segments that could be just attached to each other. You could build the bridge as long as you wanted to. And what characterizes the bridge is it has a very, very heavy top bow. And even though you can't see them well, it has 4 very, very decorative bollards, 2 at each end, and they're still there. We're hoping someday to restore this bridge and use it somehow in the city of Fitchburg. It's got a lot of history behind it. At one time, it was the only bridge over this river here, until that became unsafe and this one was built. Secondly, I want you to look over the railing at the other major feature, the Nashua River. The Nashua River was one of 2 things that were responsible for Fitchburg's incredible growth. Very early on, Fitchburg Industries located along the river for power. We had things like cotton mills, paper mills, woolen mills, grist mills, foundries, iron shops. They all located along the river for the water power. So Fitchburg grew incredibly because of the river. The Native Americans used this river for food. It was once loaded with salmon, alewives, trout, and other species of fish. The very word Nashua in the Nashaway language means beautiful river with a pebble bottom. So it's got a lot of history to it also. At one time, this river was extremely polluted. And in 1960, it was in Time magazine as being one of the most polluted rivers in the entire United States. People that lived along the river would deposit their raw sewage into the river. Businesses along the river would deposit their waste, their industrial waste, right into the river. And it became incredibly polluted. So at that time, there was a woman from Groton, her name was Marion Stoddard, and she kind of got hooked up with the business people in Fitchburg, and at that time Mayor Flynn, and they started a process to improve the river, clean up the river. And today the river is pretty clean compared to the way it used to be. Fitchburg is very, very lucky to have 8 miles of the North Nashua River in town. The river flows southeasterly to Lancaster, where it joins the south branch of the Nashua River, and from there it flows northeasterly to Nashua, New Hampshire, where it joins the Merrimack River, where it eventually flows into the ocean. So we're kind of lucky to have the river in Fitchburg, and the whole book, another book, The City and the River, was written by Doris Kirkpatrick about how important the river was. Yeah.
So my mother is Marion Stoddard.
Okay, right here. Wow. Talk about a connection.
And I want to say something. She's alive and well, and her birthday is tomorrow. She turns 96 tomorrow.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it was Marion Stoddard that really spearheaded the effort to clean the river. And I can attest to it because on the property we own in the Upper Common, I often go down by the river because it's so peaceful back there. And I just kind of sit around and watch things. And I've seen over the years down there, I've seen great blue heron. I've seen varieties of different kinds of ducks, beavers, otters, turtles, fish. The river has come back to life from being one of the worst polluted rivers in the entire nation. So good work for her. You really can't talk about Fitchburg history without mentioning the railroads. And then you can't talk about the railroads without mentioning Alva Crocker, because Alva Crocker was the one that developed the entire railroad system in Fitchburg and all points from Fitchburg. And here's how the story goes. Back in the early 1800s, Alva Crocker was a very, very successful industrialist in Fitchburg. He owned a paper mill. He was the first person to put cotton waste into paper to make it stronger. His paper mill was the biggest paper mill in the world. Now, we don't have a lot of time, but I could go through industries in Fitchburg, a dozen of them that were the biggest of their type in the world. This is what Fitchburg had at that time. It was an incredibly busy and prosperous city. But anyway, Alva Crocker understood business, and he understood that he was not going to expand and make more money if he had to deliver his paper using horse-drawn carts. He needed a railroad, and he needed that railroad to go to Boston, so Boston could distribute that stuff all over the East Coast. So he lobbied the people and the powers to be in Boston to get on board and fund a railroad from Boston to Fitchburg. They didn't want to hear it. No. If it didn't benefit Boston, Fitchburg was like the Wild West. No, nothing going on in Fitchburg. We're not going to spend any money to make a railroad to Fitchburg. So Alva Crocker said, okay, I'll do it myself. I'll build it myself. So he completely funded and built the railroad from Fitchburg to Boston. He sent to Ireland and brought in Irish labor to work on his railroad. There was not enough steel production in the United States to even make rails. He sent to England for the rails. And he started construction from Fitchburg and worked his way to Boston. He completed the railroad in 1845. And he rode the very first train from Boston to Fitchburg in 1845. To add a little insult to the politicians in Boston, he built the biggest railroad depot that they had ever seen on the waterfront in Boston, with a big sign on it, Fitchburg Depot. And it was built 100% with Rollstone granite that he carted down on the train. It was a massive depot, and he also built on top of it an auditorium that was the biggest auditorium on the East Coast at that time, seating 4,500 people. And they held all sorts of shows in this room above the depot. A very famous singer of the day, her name was Jenny Lind, sang from there. And as a matter of fact, when they raised the depot, one of the towers was bought and preserved and moved to Truro on the Cape, and it's still there, and they call that the Jenny Lind Tower. So this railroad was totally responsible and built by Alva Crocker. I want you to think about this for a minute. Fitchburg had one of the best looking, biggest, and fanciest Victorian depots in Massachusetts at one time, right on Lower Main Street. Between 75 and 95 trains a day stopped at the depot. And these people came from all over to visit Fitchburg, because Fitchburg at that time had fancy restaurants, fancy hotels, and big entertainment. There was about 12 theaters within walking distance of the depot. So it was a destination at that time. Let's get back to Alva Crocker. He built a railroad from Fitchburg to Boston. But thinking ahead, how am I going to get my product out west? And what was in the way? The Hoosick Mountain Range. Not to be deterred, Alva Crocker said, okay, we're going to build a railroad now from Fitchburg to the western part of the country, but we've got to go through the Hoosick Mountain. Impossible feat to do, but not for Alva Crocker, not for him. So he decided, okay, we're going to build a railroad going that way. And they started in North Adams to start blasting and drilling through the Hoosick Mountain. Alva Crocker soon realized after a year or so with the tools they had, black powder and hand drills. This was never going to get done in his lifetime. Never going to happen. They needed a new piece of machinery, something that would drill through rock easily. Where are you going to go to have something like that invented? Fitchburg. So he went down to the Putnam Machine Company and got a hold of a guy by the name of Burley, and he said, listen, we need a machine that hasn't even been invented yet, that'll drill through rock like butter. Get on it. So they came up with a steam-powered rock drill that made drilling extremely easy through rock. And it became the standard tool used in all rock demolition of the day. Also, another interesting little sidelight, when he was getting involved with the blasting and understanding that black powder was just not doing it, he had a friend in Switzerland by the name of Nobel. And Nobel sent one of his students out here to North Adams because he was experimenting with black powder and nitroglycerin and sawdust. And because of the Hoosick mountain range, they came up with this new explosive, dynamite, which again worked wonders with blasting through rock. This is all because of Alva Crocker. Some of you that have traveled out to that area of the state may be familiar with Turner's Falls, totally built by Alva Crocker, because he recognized the power of the river out there in Turner's Falls. And there are buildings that he actually physically paid for and built. There's still a big brick building right in the center of town, Crocker Building, that you can find online. Okay, what I want you to do right here at this site is I want you to focus, if you will, on that building right across the street that has kind of like a bluish bottom and a kind of like a cream-colored top to it. That building was not always that ugly. Believe it or not, that building was once a showpiece. It had 4 beautiful columns on the front. It was a classic Greek Revival mansion. And it had very, very fancy Rollstone granite work on the front of the building. It was a beautiful building. The only building here. So when you came up this way by Hoscott, that's what you saw. It was like coming up and seeing the White House. It was beautiful. That was the home of the Francis family, H.M. Francis family. Now, the interesting thing about that house is the H.M. Francis family, remember, were originally from Lunenburg. H.M. Francis went to school in that building when it was located on the common of Lunenburg. The building came up for sale, and the H.M. Francis family decided they were going to buy it and move it to Fitchburg. Moved it from Lunenburg.
That's a long way.
It's over 5 miles. So they bought this building, they jacked it up, not them, the company, they put it on a sled, and they pulled it here during the winter with a team of oxen and mounted it on this site. Incredible things that they did back then. This was called back then the Lunenburg Academy. And you can go online, you can Google Lunenburg Academy. There's all sorts of information on this building right online. Its mission statement, you can go right online and read their mission statement. We're talking way back now, early 1800s. Their mission statement back in the early 1800s, to train young men for the counting room, accountants, and to train young women to take their proper place in society. Mission statement probably wouldn't fly today. But anyway, up on the hill on the right, with the blue peak, that's Sima Hall, built in 1906 by the Finnish Socialist Party. They had plays in that building. They had people come from Finland and New York that actually put on plays in there. This was a very, very German and Finnish area of the city. There was a German market down on Kimball Street. On Layton Street, there was a big Sanger Hall that held a lot of German events. The thing that I find unusual about this section of the city, it was heavily Finnish, but also the other part of the city, Marshall Street area, was also heavily Finnish. So if the Finns had two areas that they claimed. This is the German Congregational Church. Later on, the German Trinitarian Church that's been here since the late 1800s. As you know, Fitchburg was a city of immigrants. And when the German immigrants came to Fitchburg, of course they came to Fitchburg with very little. They had nothing. They certainly did not have any money to build a place of worship, although they wanted one. It takes time to get established. Well, one of the German immigrant girls became very friendly with a city resident by the name of Anna Bailey. Anna's father, Jeremiah Bailey, owned a quarry on Rollstone Hill. But he also owned a lot of land around the hill, including this lot and the lot next door. So his daughter, Anna, convinced her father to donate this land to the German families so they could build a church. So the church was built on donated land from Jeremiah Bailey. Now this church also has a really interesting connection to the Rollstone Hill and the boulder. The Germans were a very, very proud group, and one of the things they loved to do was sing and party. That was part of their culture. And what they did, they would meet here in this church, and every year at Pentecost and Easter, they would hike as a big group to Rollstone Hill, to the boulder, at daybreak as the sun was rising, and celebrate. And they'd bring food up with them, wine, snacks, and things like that. They did that for years. They did that from about 1915 till about 1929-30, when the boulder was removed. And after that icon left the hill, I guess they didn't see any need to go back up to that spot. So this church, again, has a lot of history to it with the German population. Another little strange connection that it has to Fitchburg is there was a turn-of-the-century bicycle club that used this church as their headquarters. And it was called, all German, the Flying Colony. All German bicycle members. I want you to think about this. When the bicycle first came on the scene in the late 1800s, if you saw a bicycle in your town, it was like, whoa, wow. You know, what's that? They were new. They were a new invention. So they were kind of rare in a lot of the surrounding towns. If you lived in some of the surrounding cities or towns, you were waiting to see your first bicycle. At that time, Fitchburg had 4 bicycle clubs, with the Rollstone Bicycle Club being one of the oldest in the country. And one of the reasons that bicycle clubs were so popular in Fitchburg is because of the Ivor Johnson Arms and Cycle Company. There was Ivor Johnson's son, his name was Frederick. He was president of the Rollstone Bicycle Club. So he organized and dealt with a lot of the bicycle groups in the area. So there was the Flying Colony, the Rollstone Bicycle Club, the Fitchburg Bicycle Club, and the Fitchburg Wheelmen, all at the turn of the century, all bicycle clubs. Okay, let's move on. Everyone caught their breath? How are we doing? We're about halfway to the summit, so don't worry. I like to stop here because right behind you, you may notice there's some kind of smooth rocks. And there's two really good examples of them. They're not the best samples on the hill, but because we're here, we'll talk about them. And here's how the story goes. Back in the early 1800s, people started to notice these curiosities around. Like, why on earth are there smooth and polished rocks on this hill? Why on earth do these rocks have these striations cut in them? What's the story with all these boulders that are left everywhere? People had no idea. Rollstone Hill was a prime area to study. And Rollstone Hill was visited regularly by groups of college students. They came here from MIT. They came here from the Lowell Institute of Technology. They came here from Harvard University. And they came here from the Fitchburg Normal School, now Fitchburg State University, to study the mineralogy and the geology of Rollstone Hill, because there was a lot of unexplained phenomenon, things happening, things they couldn't explain. Well, a lot of that changed in 1837 when a Swedish-born scientist by the name of Henry Assis, a Harvard University professor, visited Rollstone Hill to look at all the different curiosities, and he came up with, in 1837, a theory. And his theory was, at one time, the surface of the earth was covered with a great ice sheet that moved all of these glacial erratics and caused these rock polishings and striations. A lot of people at the time just could not buy it. They couldn't see it. And they thought of the explanation to these things was more godly than scientific. But eventually that theory of glaciation took hold, and again, Fitchburg was one of the very earliest communities, again, in the country to have an Assis Association right here in town that talked about the theory of glaciation. I want you to notice, you can make out a little bit of a foundation here. Yeah. There was once a house here. It was a house of Henry Shattuck. And if you know how streets are named generally in towns, they're generally named after the last person on the street. And this was Henry Shattuck's house. That street out there is Shattuck Street. Henry Shattuck was a stone carver. And all he did was make cobblestones. So what would happen is, some of the different quarries that were up on the top of Rollstone Hill would, with a nice little cart, come down the little cart path and drop off raw granite at his door. And he would take that raw granite and carve it into blocks that would be used on the streets. So that was Henry Shattuck. So, one of the things I always like to mention to people is Rollstone Hill encompasses 95 acres of city-owned land that has never really had anything done to it. It's not buildable because it's totally rock. So to do any kind of construction up here would simply be out of the question. So using it for something like this, trails and hiking, really makes a lot of sense for the city. One of our big problems with this historic walk, and it's always been bugging me, is how Rollstone Hill got its name. There is no writings, there is no information that says for sure this is when Rollstone Hill was named and why it was named that. Now there are some ideas out there. One of the ideas is extremely early. A guy by the name of Ephraim Kimball. He was the first person to build a store in Fitchburg down by Riverside Park. he used all stone that he gathered from the base of Rollstone Hill. And he called those stones the rolling stones that he gathered from Rollstone Hill. Well, not from Rollstone Hill. It didn't have a name, but he called it Rollstone Hill. I don't know if that's stuck or not. Right after that, in some very, very early histories of Fitchburg, by Rufus Torrey, these are the earliest written recorded histories of Fitchburg. There's a section in there that talks about this hill being called Rowlandson's Hill. People back then called it Rowlandson's Hill. And the way it got that name is from Mary Rowlandson from Lancaster, who during King Philip's War was killed by the Native Americans, and they took her back to their camp, and she survived, and she wrote a diary of her journey, and on the second day, they camped by a large rock on the top of a hill. So they believe they came this way, and for years it was called Rowlandson's Hill. After that, there was a history of Massachusetts written by a Dr. Hitchcock. And in that history, he writes that there was a huge boulder that was caught in a glacier and called it the rolling stone of the hill, from which the hill gets its name. So pick the one you like. But there's no real definite. Okay, this is my favorite stop on the Rock Walk. This is the site of Fitchburg High School's rock. Not to be confused with the boulder. This is the rock. Right below that cliff right there is the surface that Fitchburg High School paints every year with their date of graduation and FHS. Now, how did this tradition start? Basically, this is the way it started. The year was 1936, and Fitchburg High School was having an absolutely terrible football season. School spirit was down in the dumps. People were walking through the halls very depressed. Attendance at Crocker Field was non-existent. The football team had no support. Bad season. 5 Fitchburg High School band members from different classes decided they were going to do something about it. So on November 14th of 1936, before a very important football game with Quincy, they came up here with some red and white paint and painted a huge FHS on the rock surface. Now, they did not pick this site at random. These 5 guys communicated with mirrors between the steps of the old academy, that was a high school back then, not the one you know of, Crocker Field, and different locations on the hill so that the sign could be seen from Crocker Field and the high school. They settled on this site, which definitely was a good site. Keep this in mind though, back then, this hill was void of a lot of vegetation. So they had a lot to choose from with the rock. So they painted the big FHS on the rock the night before the game. The next day, the city awoke and word spread incredibly fast through the community. They couldn't believe it. Who did that on the rock? It was brand new. So word spread throughout the community, a lot of excitement. Crocker Field was full that day, and they won their first game against Quincy 21-19. Yeah. From then on, every senior class has painted. Now here's another trick to the story. For the first few years, it was done by people from all different classes. So all they painted was FHS. 5 or 6 years into it, the tradition was hijacked by the seniors, and then they painted their year of graduation. I always like to do this because more times than not, someone knows of these people. These are the names of the 5 original guys that painted the rock on November 14th, 1936. Gordon Keller, Guy Farwell, Charlie Berry, Bob Darby, and Murray Rice. Many different classes are represented there. The interesting thing is, all 5 of those guys went into World War II. All 5. They never let any of their classmates, they formed this pact, they weren't going to tell anybody who painted it. And the truth only came out when all 5 returned after World War II and the story came out. Guy Farwell did a taped interview with the Fitchburg Sentinel on the entire story behind the painting of the rock. I know his son, Malcolm Farwell. He came on one of our walks, and Malcolm Farwell stopped in the gallery one day and gave me the entire taped interview. So we have that on record right now. If you were to stand on this site between the years 1825 and 1941, this site would be absolutely littered with 75 to 100 foot tall derricks with 1-inch wide cables coming down from them that would be used to move huge blocks of granite all over the place. And those blocks of granite were put on carts, cart down to the Union Station, the depot, and shipped out by railroad car. Keep this figure in mind. During its heyday, 40 railroad cars of granite left Fitchburg every day. 40. That's a lot of granite. There's 6 active quarries taking stone off this hill during that time. And that granite was used everywhere in New England. It was shipped everywhere. It made it as far as New York, where it was used in all the bridges that span the Hudson River. In just about every foundation in this area, if you see granite, chances are good it came from Rollstone Hill. So they were taking granite off this hill like you wouldn't believe. Also keep this in mind. During that period of time, 1825 to 1941, when there were 6 active quarries on this hill, all day long, rock drills, hammer drills, explosions, all day long. No complaints. No complaints. They were lucky to have a job, these people. And the people that lived down on Beach Street and some of the areas that were very close to Rollstone Hill, they understood. Those were people that worked there. They needed that job. So there wasn't any complaining about, oh, it's noisy. You know? These were people that were working. In the winter, when the quarry companies laid off all of the workers because it became too dangerous on the hill to work up here when there was snow, Fitchburg was so busy during that time that many of the mills worked extra shifts into their schedules. And one of them was right down over the bank in the Ivor Johnson Arms and Cycle Works. They put on a midnight shift to employ as many quarry workers that wanted to work. And when the time came for them to come back to work up here, they came back to the quarries. That's how busy things were back then. The first group of immigrants to work in the quarries were the Irish. And the crews back then were almost all Irish. They were the first immigrant group to work here. When they left, it was the Finnish. They were total Finnish quarry crews that worked on Rollstone Hill. As a matter of fact, Jeremiah Shea needed help so bad that he went down to Boston, and when some of the ships came in from Finland, he would communicate with these people and say, listen, come to Fitchburg. We have places for you to live and work in Fitchburg. The Finns lived in an area right behind Workers' Credit Union called Finnville. There were all sorts of tenement buildings there. Of course, the Irish, before them, lived off of Water Street in the area called the Patch. That's where the Irish lived first. After the Irish, after the Finnish, the next group of immigrants to work the quarries were the Italians. And the Italians were welcomed in the quarries because many of them came to the United States with stone carving skills. So they were kind of in demand. And after the Italians left, they took over a lot of the apartments and housing where the Irish used to live. Because the Irish by that time had made a little bit of money, maybe got better jobs, and were able to move out of the patch. So the Italians took their place. Okay, you've done it. You've made it to the site of the Rollstone boulder. This is the summit of Rollstone Hill. So the boulder at one point in time sat right on the spot. So when that boulder sat right here, the hill of course was totally different. There was granite everywhere. McAuliffe Quarry Corporation, their quarry head wall was creeping up to the boulder. It had to go. Like we talked about down in the valley, word spread throughout the community. Mayor got calls, letters to the Sentinel. They decided to come up with a plan. The McAuliffe Quarry Corporation workers came to the boulder, stuffed a bag of black powder under the boulder to break it up into pieces, lit it, ran, dust settled, nothing. Didn't budge. And here they're thinking that the thing's going to fall apart when they take the band off of it. They decide, okay, let's try an entire keg. So they put a keg of black powder under the boulder, lit it, ran, dust settled, nothing. It didn't budge. So they quit for the day. They came back the next day and they decided to try a different strategy. Using the Burley rock drill, they drilled holes into the boulder, stuffed those holes with black powder, and finally the rock split apart, fractured into 54 major pieces, fell apart, and half of it slid down the quarry wall. Those pieces were loaded onto a truck, stored on the hill for 1 year, like we said, then brought down to the common, where was reassembled. Quite an incredible process. So that pretty much is the story of the Rollstone boulder. Now I want you to think about this. Poets, turn of the century, writing poems about Fitchburg. What other community has stuff like this? And that poem is a 19th century poem written by Martha Tolman, and it's titled Rollstone Mountain. And it goes something like this. Rollstone Mountain, thee we hail, girded with thy granite mail. Many a legend, story, song, round thy steadfast grandeur throng. At our feet our city grows. Children of thy mighty throes are our bridges, blocks, and towers. Thy foundations still are ours. Still the busy hammers ring. Still the lofty derricks swing, setting forth by labor's hand untold wealth at thy command. Days have come and days have gone. Times have changed, but thou livest on. O'er the still and calm blue skies, lean, and when the daylight dies, starry hosts come forth to see thy grandeur and simplicity. All unmoved when storms do rage, thou dost stand, ancient of days. Calm as when the skies are blue, and the sweet stars gaze on you. Still be strength and benison, Rollstone as the years roll on. Rollstone Hill Rock Walk. Yep. Ready to go? Okay, here we go.